tea was a quiet afternoon, the kind where the sunlight filtered through the kitchen windows in soft, golden beams, casting a warm glow over everything it touched. I had wandered into the kitchen, searching for a snack, while my girlfriend, Lily, was still in her room upstairs, finishing up some last-minute work. I hadn't expected anyone else to be home, assuming her mom, Vera, would still be out running errands. The house was still, except for the distant sound of Lily typing away. I pulled open the refrigerator, my mind drifting as I scanned the shelves, until I heard a soft voice behind me. "Hey, need any help with that?" I spun around, not expecting anyone, and there stood Vera, Lily's mom. She had a light smile on her face, the kind that made you feel at ease. Her dark hair, slightly tousled from the day, framed her face in a way that brought out her striking features. Vera had always been warm, the type of person who knew how to fill a room with her presence, without overwhelming it. Today, though, something felt different. Just looking for something to eat," I stammered, feeling slightly awkward. There was nothing particularly unusual about this moment, but her sudden presence in the kitchen had caught me off guard. She moved closer, her footsteps soft against the hardwood floor, and leaned beside me to open a nearby cabinet. The scent of her perfume, floral, faintly sweet, lingered in the air between us. "I made some pasta earlier. There's a little left if you're interested," she said, glancing at me, her eyes catching mine for just a second too long. "That sounds great," I replied, trying to shake the odd sense of nervousness creeping over me. She smiled again, but this time, it felt different. Like there was something unsaid hovering in the space between us. Vera reached up to a higher shelf, her shirt lifting slightly as she stretched, exposing just a sliver of her waist. I quickly looked away, feeling a sudden heat rise to my face. This was Lily's mom. I shouldn't be noticing things like that. But the way the light hit her skin, the smoothness of her movements, it was hard to ignore. It felt wrong to let my thoughts linger there, but once they'd started, I couldn't seem to stop them. "You've been spending a lot of time here," Vera commented casually, her back to me now as she reached for a plate. "It's nice having you around." I swallowed, unsure how to respond. "Yeah, Lily's great. I like being here." Vera turned back around, her smile softer now. "She's lucky to have you." There was again something in her voice, in the way she said those words, that felt like it carried more weight than it should have. My heart beat a little faster. Was I imagining things? I had to be. I couldn't let my mind wander like this. She set the plate on the counter, and as she moved past me to the refrigerator, her arm brushed mine, just barely. A shiver ran down my spine at the light contact. It was nothing, just an accidental touch. But it felt charged, like there was something beneath the surface neither of us was acknowledging. I forced myself to focus on the food. "Thanks for the pasta," I said quickly, trying to break the tension I felt building in the air. Vera leaned against the counter now, watching me, her expression unreadable. "It's nothing. I'm just glad you're comfortable here." Her words seemed innocuous enough, but the way she looked at me, her eyes holding mine a moment too long, made it hard to breathe normally. There was something in that gaze, something I couldn't quite decipher. Attraction? No, it couldn't be. But my thoughts were betraying me now. I couldn't deny the way her presence made me feel, not the way I normally felt around Lily. This was different. Wrong, even. But I couldn't shake it. She stood up straighter, breaking eye contact first, and turned back to the fridge. "Well, I should leave you to it. Just wanted to check in." "Yeah, of course," I managed to say, my voice sounding distant, even to myself. But she didn't leave right away. Instead, she lingered for a second longer, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the counter, her gaze flickering toward me once more before she finally turned and left the kitchen. As soon as she was gone, I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath. My mind raced. What had just happened? Had I imagined that tension? Or was it real? My heart was still pounding, my skin tingling where her arm had brushed mine. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking things. But deep down, I knew something had shifted in that kitchen. A connection, unspoken but undeniable, had sparked between us, leaving me confused and off balance. I grabbed the plate of pasta, but my appetite was gone. All I could think about was Vera, her smile, her lingering touch, and the strange, intoxicating sense of attraction that had started to bloom in the most unexpected of places. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I tried to act normal when Lily came downstairs, but my mind kept drifting back to that moment in the kitchen with Vera. I couldn't stop replaying it in my head, dissecting every glance, every touch. What had I felt? What had she felt? I was starting to lose track of time, trying to immerse myself in conversations with Lily about her day, her plans for the weekend. But behind every word I said, the memory of her mother kept creeping in, uninvited and unwelcome. I had to shake this off. This was wrong. I was here for Lily, not for these strange new feelings that I didn't know how to control. That evening after dinner, I excused myself early. I told Lily I was feeling tired, which wasn't entirely a lie. My head was pounding from overthinking everything, and I needed some space to clear it. As I made my way upstairs, I passed Vero in the hallway. She was carrying a basket of laundry, her steps light and casual, but the moment we locked eyes, that same charge from earlier surged between us. Her lips parted slightly, as if she was going to say something, but she didn't. Instead, we stood there in silence just for a beat too long. Then she smiled, a small, almost knowing smile, and walked past me, brushing against my arm again in a way that felt deliberate this time. I felt my pulse quicken. This was real. I wasn't imagining it. The way she moved, the way she looked at me, there was something unmistakable in it. But I couldn't let myself go there. I had to stay focused, stay grounded. I went to Lily's room, hoping being near her would snap me out of it. She was watching something on her laptop, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her, trying to let her warmth ground me. But every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was Vera's face, those eyes that seemed to hold some secret I couldn't unravel. When Lily fell asleep, I quietly slipped out of bed. I needed air, something to clear my head. I went downstairs, hoping the stillness of the night would help calm the chaos inside me. But the moment I stepped into the kitchen, I froze. Vera was there, leaning against the counter, a glass of wine in her hand. She didn't seem surprised to see me. In fact, it almost felt like she had been waiting for me. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly, her voice low in the quiet of the house. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My throat felt tight, my thoughts scrambled. Vera took a slow sip of her wine, her eyes never leaving mine. Me neither. The tension in the room was palpable now, thicker than it had been earlier. There was no mistaking it this time. We were both feeling it, this invisible pull that seemed to draw us closer, even though we both knew it was wrong. I wanted to say something, anything to break the spell, but I couldn't. My feet seemed rooted to the spot, my heart pounding in my chest. Vera set her glass down on the counter and took a step toward me, her movements slow and deliberate. "You seem distracted tonight," she said, her voice almost teasing. "Is everything okay?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. She was so close now, too close. The air between us felt charged, like it was buzzing with electricity. And then she reached out, her fingers lightly brushing my arm, the same way they had earlier in the hallway. But this time, there was no mistaking the intention behind it. Her touch lingered, soft but purposeful, and it sent a jolt of heat through my body. "I've noticed the way you've been looking at me," Vera said softly, her eyes searching mine. My heart stopped. She knew. Of course she knew. I began, but she silenced me with a gentle press of her finger against my lips. The touch was so intimate, so wrong, but I couldn't pull away. "I won't tell if you won't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. And then, before I could stop it, before I could even think, she kissed me. It was soft at first, tentative, like she was testing the waters. But when I didn't pull away, it deepened, and the tension that had been building all day exploded between us. Her hands slid up my arms, pulling me closer, and I found myself kissing her back, my mind reeling, my body betraying me. This was wrong. So wrong. but it felt so intense, so real, and I couldn't stop myself. For a moment, we were lost in it. The kiss, the heat, the overwhelming sense of desire that had been simmering beneath the surface all day. But then, as quickly as it had started, I pulled away, gasping for air. "What are we doing?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Vera looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of desire and regret. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I can't stop thinking about you." I stared at her, my heart racing, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. This couldn't be happening. But it had, and now there was no going back. I can't do this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is wrong. I love Lily." Vera's expression softened, and for the first time, she looked vulnerable. "I know," she said quietly. "I know it's wrong. But I can't help how I feel." The room was silent, the weight of what had just happened hanging heavy in the air between us. Neither of us knew what to say, how to move forward. All we knew was that we had crossed a line, and nothing would ever be the same again. The silence in the kitchen felt suffocating. Vera was standing so close to me, her eyes still locked onto mine, searching for something, some kind of reassurance, an answer to the chaos that had just unfolded between us. My mind was screaming at me to leave, to run back upstairs to Lily, to pretend this had never happened. But my body wasn't listening. The kiss still burned on my lips, and I couldn't shake the feeling of her hands on my skin. Vera took a small step back, as if giving me space to breathe, but her gaze never wavered. "I know you love her," she said softly, her voice filled with something between guilt and yearning. "And I don't want to hurt her. I never wanted this to happen." My throat felt tight. I swallowed hard, trying to find the right words, but nothing seemed right. What could I possibly say? That I hadn't felt something? That I wasn't drawn to her in a way that terrified me? I didn't want to lie to her, and I definitely couldn't lie to myself anymore. "This can't happen again," I finally managed to say, my voice trembling with the weight of the words. "It can't." Vera nodded, her expression unreadable now. "I know," she whispered. "But you felt it too, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The truth was written all over my face, in the way I had kissed her back, in the way I hadn't pulled away. I couldn't deny it, no matter how much I wanted to. "I'll stay out of your way," Vera said, her voice low, almost resigned. "I'll make sure this doesn't affect anything between you and Lily." She was trying to be practical, to put distance between us before things spiraled even further out of control. But the problem was, we had already crossed a line, and that tension, that pull, wasn't going away just because we pretended it didn't exist. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to clear my head. I think I should go," I muttered, taking a step toward the door. I needed space, time to process what had just happened, away from her, away from the temptation. But as I turned to leave, Vera's voice stopped me. "Do you really think you can forget about this?" she asked, her tone soft but filled with emotion. I froze, her words hanging in the air between us. Could I? Could I just forget the way her lips had felt on mine, the way her touch had sent a jolt of electricity through me? I wanted to say yes. I wanted to be the kind of person who could walk away from this without looking back. But something about the way she looked at me, the raw vulnerability in her eyes, made me doubt that. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I have to try." With that, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest. The second I stepped into the hallway, I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. My mind was spinning, my thoughts tangled in knots. How had things gotten so out of control so quickly? One moment, everything had been normal, comfortable, even, and the next, I was in the middle of something I never could have predicted. I took a deep breath and headed upstairs, my legs feeling heavier with each step. When I reached Lily's room, I paused outside the door, listening to the soft sound of her breathing. She was asleep, peaceful and completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface of our lives. I slipped into bed beside her, careful not to wake her. The familiar warmth of her body next to mine should have been comforting, should have reminded me of everything good and right in my life. But instead, all I could think about was the kiss. The way it had felt, so forbidden, so wrong, yet so undeniably real. Guilt gnawed at me, settling deep in my chest. How could I have let this happen? I loved Lily. She was kind, thoughtful, everything I could want in a partner. But now, every time I looked at her, all I could see was the betrayal I hadn't meant to commit, but had committed all the same. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying the events in the kitchen over and over again. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Vera, her eyes, her lips, the way she had looked at me, like I was the only person in the world who understood what she was feeling. By the time morning came, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. I dragged myself out of bed, careful not to wake Lily, and headed downstairs. The house was quiet again, the kind of stillness that made me nervous. I wondered if Vera was already awake, and if she was, how we were supposed to face each other after what had happened. But when I walked into the kitchen, Vera was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was a note on the counter, written in her neat, precise handwriting. "I've gone out for the morning. I'll be back later. Vera." I stared at the note for a long time, the weight of her absence settling heavily on my chest. She was giving me space, just like she had promised. But instead of feeling relieved, I felt empty, like something important had been taken from me. The day passed slowly, each hour dragging into the next. I couldn't focus on anything. Lily and I had plans to go out, but even as we walked through the park, holding hands, I felt distant, like I was moving through a fog. I tried to shake it off, to be present with her, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop thinking about Vera. The way she had kissed me, the way it had made me feel alive in a way I hadn't expected. When we returned to the house, Vera was still gone, and a strange sense of relief washed over me. I wasn't ready to face her again. Not yet. But that night, as I lay in bed next to Lily, the weight of the situation pressed down on me. This wasn't going away. I couldn't pretend it hadn't happened, couldn't ignore the way it had changed everything. And I couldn't deny the truth any longer. I was drawn to Vera in a way I couldn't explain, and no matter how much I tried to fight it, that connection wasn't going away. The following days felt like walking through a minefield. Every glance, every conversation with Vera carried the weight of that kiss, of the emotions we were both struggling to suppress. Lily remained blissfully unaware of the undercurrent between her mother and me, and that ignorance only made the guilt worse. She deserved better than my divided attention, better than the lies I told myself. That this would fade, that things could return to normal. But nothing about my life felt normal anymore. Vera and I avoided being alone together as much as possible. When we did cross paths, our interactions were brief, strained, and laced with the tension we both knew was there, but didn't dare speak of. One evening, about a week after the kiss, I found myself alone in the house. Lily had gone out with some friends, and Vera had been at work all day. I tried to keep busy, but my thoughts kept wandering back to that moment in the kitchen, to the way her lips had felt on mine. As if on cue, I heard the front door open and close softly. A few seconds later, Vera appeared in the doorway to the living room. She hesitated when she saw me, her hand still on the doorframe, as though she was debating whether to enter or turn around and leave. I stood up from the couch, feeling the familiar rush of nervous energy at the sight of her. "Hey," I said awkwardly, my voice a little too loud in the silence of the room. "Hey," she replied, her voice soft. She took a step into the room, then another until she was standing just a few feet away from me. The air between us crackled with unspoken words, with the weight of everything we hadn't addressed. "I think we need to talk," Vera said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my heart racing. "Yeah, I think we do." For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears, could feel the heat rising in my chest. This was it. The moment where we either confronted what had happened or buried it once and for all. "I can't stop thinking about that night," Vera confessed, her eyes flickering up to meet mine. "About what we did. About you." I swallowed hard, the guilt and desire warring inside me. "I know," I said quietly. "I've been thinking about it too." Vera took a deep breath, her expression conflicted. "I know it was wrong. I know we shouldn't have, but I can't help it. Every time I see you, I feel something I haven't felt in years." She looked away, her voice trembling with vulnerability. "And I don't know how to stop." Her admission hit me like a punch to the gut. I could see the pain in her eyes, the same pain I'd been feeling ever since that kiss. We were both trapped in this impossible situation, torn between what we knew was right and what we couldn't deny was real. "I don't want to hurt Lily," I said, my voice breaking. "But I can't stop thinking about you either." Vera's eyes filled with unshed tears, and she shook her head. "We can't keep doing this. It's not fair to her, and it's not fair to us." "I know," I whispered. "But what are we supposed to do?" She took a step closer, her hand reaching out to touch mine. Her fingers were warm, soft, and the moment our skin connected, it was like a spark igniting between us. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice shaking. "But I don't want to lose you." I looked down at her hand, my heart heavy with guilt and longing. I didn't want to lose her either, but the reality of what we were doing was starting to crush me. We had already crossed a line that couldn't be undone, and now we were standing on the edge of something even more dangerous. "I don't want to hurt anyone," I said, my voice barely audible. "But I can't deny what I feel for you." For a moment, we stood there in silence, the weight of our emotions pressing down on us. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the same conflict that was tearing me apart inside. And then, as if unable to fight it any longer, Vera stepped closer and pulled me into a kiss. This one wasn't like the first. It wasn't tentative or hesitant. It was filled with desperation, with the overwhelming need to feel something real in the midst of all the confusion. Her hands gripped my shirt, pulling me closer, and I wrapped my arms around her, losing myself in the intensity of the moment. The kiss deepened, our bodies pressing together as the heat between us ignited once more. I felt her fingers trace the back of my neck, sending shivers down my spine, and I couldn't stop myself from wanting more. The guilt, the fear, the consequences, all of it faded away as I kissed her back with everything I had. But then, just as quickly as it had started, reality crashed back in. I pulled away, breathless and shaken, my heart pounding in my chest. "We can't," I said, my voice trembling. "We can't do this." Vera stared at me, her chest rising and falling with each ragged breath. "I know," she whispered, her voice filled with sorrow. "I know." We stood there for a long moment, both of us struggling to regain control, to rein in the emotions that had consumed us. The weight of our actions hung heavily in the air, and for the first time, I felt the full gravity of what we had done. "We have to stop," I said, forcing the words out even though they felt like they were tearing me apart. "We can't let this happen again." Vera nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You're right," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We have to stop." There was nothing left to say. We both knew what had to happen, even if it hurt more than either of us had expected. As Vera turned and walked away, I felt a sense of loss that cut deeper than I could have imagined. This wasn't just about the kiss. It was about everything. The connection we had shared, the feelings that had grown between us despite every reason they shouldn't have. But it was over now. It had to be. I stood there in the empty living room, staring at the spot where she had been, my heart heavy with the weight of everything we had lost. Later that night, when Lily came home, I held her a little tighter, my heart filled with guilt and regret. I didn't deserve her. Not after what I had done. But as she smiled up at me, completely unaware of the storm that had raged between her mother and me, I knew that I had to let go of Vera. I had to bury those feelings, no matter how strong they were, for the sake of everything I had with Lily. The days that followed were hard. Vera and I barely spoke, both of us avoiding each other as much as possible. The tension between us had shifted into something heavier, something filled with regret and longing that neither of us could ignore but had no choice but to push down. We had crossed a line that could never be undone, and though we had made the decision to stop, The emotions we had felt in those moments would never completely disappear. They would linger, haunting us both in quiet moments when we were alone, reminders of what could have been if things were different. But in the end, we had chosen the only path we could. One filled with loss, with sacrifice, but also with the hope that, maybe, we could find a way forward without destroying everything in the process. And as I lay in bed that night, Lily asleep beside me, I closed my eyes and tried to let go of the past, of the kiss, of the feelings of Vera. But deep down, I knew I never truly would.